Hey guys, it's Lindsay at the blog Repurpose and Upcycle. Today I'm going to be going over a bedside table makeover with Heirloom Traditions All-in-One paint. Before we get started, let's talk about Heirloom Traditions paint. Heirloom Traditions is a fairly new paint that's considered all-in-one. And what that means is they've combined the primer, the paint, and the sealer all in one paint. Now, I'll be honest, I'm a huge fan of primer. I feel like it's just almost a necessity, especially when you're doing furniture painting. So I was a little hesitant to try the Heirloom Traditions All-in-One paint without primer, but I'm going to show you how to paint this without it. Now, Heirloom Traditions is not a chalk paint. A few things about Heirloom Traditions before we begin. You can't slap the paint on, expect it to dry, and look completely smooth. There definitely is a technique to using this paint. The first time I used this paint, I went with the technique I generally use to paint laminate furniture, which is brush it on with the first coat, and then the second or maybe even the third coat, use a foam brush to really reduce brush strokes. Now, this paint is thicker than most paints. Most furniture paints like chalk paints and milk paints. But if you think about it, this is an all-in-one paint. So if we're combining primer, paint, and sealer, it makes sense that it is thicker. But with it being thicker, it takes a little more technique to eliminate brush strokes. The Heirloom Traditions has some fabulous video tutorials and even step-by-step instructions on their website. And to be honest with you, I didn't use those instructions when I first used this paint and it didn't turn out. So I'm going to show you my mistakes and I'm going to show you how to successfully use this paint to get an ultra smooth finish. Before you think about painting anything, you're going to want to clean and degrease your furniture piece really well. Because you're not using a primer, you want to make sure that the surface is absolutely clean and free of any sort of debris. I used a liquid sandpaper deglosser product and I've already wiped it down with a lint-free cloth. I let it dry and now we're ready to paint. Before we get into painting the bedside table, I want to talk about the technique that I said that is really important to use when using this paint. Now, like I said a second ago, before I just slapped the paint on with a paintbrush and then I used a foam brush to try to go over it. Well, the paint is thicker, it dries thicker, so those brush strokes, I couldn't just go over it with a foam brush and eliminate those brush strokes. They were still there. And that was totally my fault. That's just the way I've done other paints. That's the way I've painted laminate furniture, so I figured that would work. But this paint is a wee bit different. And they're very upfront about saying, really there are two techniques you can use. You can use a brush and stipple, which is where you use this handy foam piece. And what you do is you brush a really thick coat on, and then you go back with a really light stipple method, and you just barely touch the surface of that and you stipple the surface so you get a smooth finish and you don't see those brush strokes. Now, the other way you can do it, and this is how I'm mostly gonna, the technique that I'm mostly gonna use today, it's the brush and roll technique. So you're gonna put a heavy coat of paint on, then you're gonna take your foam roller and you're just going to roll it to really even out the surface. Another thing about this paint, which is good and bad, it dries ultra fast. I'm talking like 30 minutes. It's really good if you want to get your project done fast, but the bad part is you got to be really mindful of paint drips and areas that like to puddle paint. You really got to stay on top of that. And that's what I love to use this foam pad for. I can go in and I can really pull up where the paint has puddled or if there's like a paint drip. So I'm going to use all three of these products. I'm going to use the paintbrush, I'm going to use the foam roller, and I'm going to use the foam pad. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to successfully paint this bedside table with the Heirloom Traditions paint. All right, guys, I'm going to start, I think, on the front with the drawers. And I put a lot of paint up here in my paint tray. I'm going to take my paintbrush, okay, I'm going to put a good bit of paint on my paintbrush. And don't ever worry about using too much paint. This is a thick product. You're not going to hurt anything if you use too much paint, but if you don't use enough, when you roll it or you stipple it, you're not going to get that even looking finish. So I'm just putting a really heavy coat on here, okay? And you will notice, well, another thing I noticed about this paint is it really doesn't seem to go as far as most paints. But then again, when you remember that this is replacing a primer, paint, and a sealer, it makes sense that it might not go quite as far because really it's all three in one. Okay, so once I get that base coat on, I'm going to put a really light coat of paint on my roller. By the way, this is a fine finish foam roller. And I'm just going to lightly is the key. I'm going to lightly go over it. Now the first coat, this is on any piece of furniture really, the first coat never looks good. Okay, so don't expect the first coat to look great. It's always the second coat that's really going to even things out. Now I'm going to take my little sponge, and this is where I'm going to stipple. I'm going to stipple the sides. And one tip I have with this is don't push in on it, because when you push in on it, you're going to pull the paint up. What you're going to do is you're just going to barely put pressure and stipple that just like that. And like I said, this paint dries super fast. So you've got to be diligent about paint puddles and paint drips. But okay, so there's that. Like I said, it doesn't look great. The first coat is always ugly. Once I've moved on from this, I'm going to continue on and do the lower one. There's not really any rhyme or reason to this. As far as painting dressers, bedside tables, everybody tends to do it differently. Like I said, there's not really any rhyme or reason to it. Some people will tell you there's a better technique than others, but every piece of furniture is different. So now I'm just going to stipple it. And after this first coat dries, I'm going to pull these drawers out and paint the sides and paint the areas that I can't see now. When you're painting dressers or anything with a ton of little crevices, just make sure you get that paint deep down in the crevices. Okay, just like that. And like I said, after I'm done with the first coat, I'm going to pull these drawers out and see if there's anything inside of them that I need to cover with paint. Make sure you don't have too much paint on your paint roller. Just roll that. And what this is doing is eliminating the brush strokes. Because like I said, this is a thicker paint, it will show brush strokes. So the first time I used this paint, where I went wrong, like I said, was I put the first coat on with a brush. And when it dried, I just couldn't cover up the brush strokes. So what I had to end up doing was sanding it down with a fine grit sandpaper and then going back over it with a foam brush. So this time around, I'm hopefully doing it the right way, doing it the way I should have done from the beginning. Yeah. I hate to tell on myself, but sometimes I feel like it's easier to learn from mistakes than me telling you how to do it. Like I said, it doesn't look great, but that second coat is where you're really gonna be able to see the difference. We just want to make sure we're as smooth as we can on the first coat. Really be mindful about the corners where paint can glob up, especially with this paint because it is thicker. I have this one little area I couldn't get paint up into. So I'm going to use this. So the first coat of paint is on and it's dry. I can run my fingers across it. I got gloves this time, I got smart. And it's completely dry. So now it's time for the second coat. And the second coat you put on just like the first coat. You're just gonna put that paint on and then you're gonna staple it and roll it. So this time, I think I'm going to start by just rolling the center. See how much smoother that looks? Love coming in with the second coat when it finally looks like a pretty painted piece of furniture. That first coat just never looks good. Okay, and I'm not putting pressure, because if you put pressure, there you don't have enough paint on your paint roller. Okay, so now I'm going to take my brush. I'm just going to go in the corners. Okay, just like that, just to get an even coat. Make sure I have enough paint on. In most of the tutorials I've watched, most of them say 2 coats is good. So we'll have to let that dry and see. But guys, I'm just going to continue on with this method until I get it done. And then we will reevaluate and see what it looks like. Alright y'all, I am nearing the end of the second coat. I just wanted to show you the top. It's looking much better. And like I said, this paint, the one thing you have to keep in mind is that you really need to use quite a bit of it. And then immediately after you put it on, if you do it with a paintbrush, you really need to smooth it out. It's thicker, it will cause brush strokes if you're not careful. So that's really my biggest tip with this paint, is being mindful of paint drips, because it dries so fast, and really making sure about those brush strokes, about if you brush and roll or brush and stipple. And I've done both, especially in areas where you have a little bit of, it's not a flat surface. You're going to have to stipple it. Okay, and here's this. I'm going to let this dry for about a half an hour to an hour and see if I need a third coat. Let's talk durability for a minute. This is the one that I previously painted, and I had to do like 3 coats just to get it back to where it didn't look like it had a lot of streaks, like brush strokes. So I want to talk about durability. This has been painted for about a week, and you can see I can scratch my fingernail really hard and nothing comes off. So as far as durability, I'm super pleased. I've had my phone, I've had like 3 or 4 different TV remotes, and so far nothing has been scratched. Here it is, guys. I have 2 full coats and it looks amazing. Now, I did go ahead and put 3 coats on the top just to give it just an extra level of smoothness. Just because really the top is mainly what you're going to see. But overall, I'm really pleased. Remember, I went from a very, very dark laminate veneer to this beautiful white bedside table. So I hope I've given you some advice and some helpful tips to create successful paint projects with Heirloom all-in-one paint. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a video.